The Otto Wagner designed Hitzing Hof Pavilion in Vienna is a beautiful little Art Nouveau structure. So I'm drawing this with a 0.3mm pen. The really interesting part is this wonderful Art Nouveau drum and small dome, which is over the room of the railway station, which was designed in the hope that the Emperor Franz Joseph would use it when he went to Schönbrunn Palace. So I'm really trying just to get the proportions. I've already made this dark oval window a bit too large, which is throwing out all the proportions for everything else. So I can tell that it's not quite right. So I'm trying to make little adjustments as I go. I push the walls out further of the drum, even though there end up therefore being a few surplus lines. I think it's always better to have the odd line that doesn't really fit in anywhere than to have a mistake that you could have either corrected or softened the effect of. So with these little Art Nouveau embellishments, it's really trying to capture the shape and the gesture of the pieces and the contrast between the various lines and decorative finishes rather than the exactness of it. So I'm just finishing the little end bits here that are seen side on, and then I've got this low flat dome. Domes are always a fun challenge when you're drawing freehand directly with pen. I'm putting off doing it. Now my sweet spot with domes is the left hand side up to the center, and then being right-handed, it's not as easy for me to get a nice symmetrical shape on the right hand side. So as you can see, it's a bit squashed and flattened, and so I make a few little changes. I put a more correct line in, hoping it won't look so obvious at the end, which I think is the case. So I just darken this heavier line here. I take it up a little bit higher. I raised it because that would have the effect of making the drum not quite so tall. Sometimes there are just very minor modifications like that we can make if the proportions aren't quite right, just to bring them slightly back into a closer state. So now I've got the rest of the station to start doing, and I want to define where the railway station awnings finish, where they start and finish. They're obviously, besides the dome, the major visual impact of the drawing. Now, I put this window in first. I don't quite get the proportions right. My window comes down a little too far. It's just a bit too high. It should be a narrower horizontal band. But I'm at least happy with the way the window divisions work out, even if the whole thing is a bit too high. And sorry about that, but we lost about 5 minutes of drawing because I forgot to put the camera on. But drawn the two side wings of the overhead pavilion. And I positioned these two awnings of the railway station carefully. I have enough information now to be able to do that fairly accurately, and making sure I line them up on the horizontal as well. There's a lot of things from one side of the platform to the other that need to line up, and so I take care to do that because that has to be pretty exact so that there's no self-consciousness of things not looking right there. And the same with the railway platforms. I measure the perspective angles of the platform with my pen as I do for buildings. Now with this curved awning that we have on the right hand side, rather than try and draw it as a long curved line, I divide it up into curved or semi-curved or more straight sections, just so I can align it more easily and draw it more accurately. And I'm also seeing where these top parts align with the dome to the left. Now there's foreshortening on these vertical lines on the face of the awning that I presume line up partly with construction and partly with the materials used. And then trying to get the greater angled right side of the platform done. Again, if I get the two sides right, it's going to be easier then to get the railway lines to spread those across the angles from left to right. And I use the windows, because the window is fairly accurate horizontally, I use that to position the tracks and other details that we see through the actual railway underpass. With these railway lines, I was pretty unhappy with my first lines because they weren't exactly right. But as I worked hard to position them a little more accurately, I was quite happy with the fairly casual and relatively accurate look that they ended up having. But the important thing is not to overdo the line work, particularly in the distance. So sometimes it is better in the distance to leave a light line that's not quite in the right place than to draw the correct one in if it ends up meaning the line looks too heavy, because that will draw attention. And also things that we see through this railway cutting, they are in the distance, so we don't want them to feel too close. So a light touch, light detail. Always going across from one side to the other, aligning on the horizontal. Initially I was going to use tone for this, but I decided just to use pen and hatching, and so there's a lot of vertical lines to put. When we want a fairly dark effect, rather than cross hatch horizontally or diagonally, I prefer to do a very slight to one side of the vertical over the top of the vertical lines. I find that can give me a nice, really very dark effect without distracting from the form beneath it, the vertical form beneath it. So I put this side on. I start to put the figures on. I feel the figures are just a tiny bit too large, but it actually is a very small railway station. I've been there a number of times. I took this photo myself. So it is a surprisingly small scale station for the one outside the Imperial Palace in Vienna. And again with the hatching. It's all fairly dark in the reference, so I'm trying to work out exactly what's what. This is actually a suspended duct under the platform awning. I didn't really understand what it was when I was drawing it, which is always a problem. I should have checked the photo, overexposing it to bring up the detail. I realized when I was drawing it that it is just a duct, and it was only a little bit wider than it was tall. So in a moment you'll see me try and adjust it to what I knew it was, but it was sort of a bit late then to do a nice clean job of it. Trying to finish the detail in the background now. It was a bit tricky using the same pen to get a lighter touch and still to actually create the shapes. And then I know I have to work on the railway lines. These for me were always going to be the more challenging part of the drawing. I don't draw railway lines very often, and you've got that lovely bend, which is such an important part of the interest of the scene, but it is a bit challenging. And these are the sorts of angles of these railway lines where if they don't get pretty much on point, they're going to look a bit awkward. So I was just concerned to position them reasonably enough. Again, I'm doing this horizontal alignment, and I didn't want to get bogged down in drawing the details of all the little sort of the effect of the concrete sleepers and the gravel and the way the railway lines have been set in the station area. And yet I did want to convey something of the texture. So it was a case of doing a little more detail right in the very lower front section of the drawing and trying to do less detail with a lighter touch, but to give the sense that it continues further back. I do a bit more of that later. I want to get this awning done and a sense of the shadow in place. There was a lot of hatching here. This was quite a tedious part to do compared to the other parts of the drawing. But yeah, so I want to get this section done, and then I can do some of the darker shade. This is the section obviously where if you use marker it's a big time saver. Sometimes little horizontal hatch marks like that are a bit tedious to do, but they do help to create distinction between the various forms, the various structures, the different angles that we're looking at. Now I'm doing this aware that I'm going to do some all over hatching all over it. I just wanted to create the sense of some sort of structure under the hatching that we can make out through the shadows, so to speak. So this was my method of doing that, and now I go over the whole thing with a slightly angled line over the top of those horizontal ones, hoping to get that effect. And I decide I really need to go a lot darker. About this stage I realise that's actually a suspended duct, and I should have done it a bit more neatly. So feeling annoyed about that, and decide to make this a little bit darker again if I can, but not wanting it to be as black as in the original. And then I think I really better finish these railway lines. I was getting late for a medical appointment, so I was rushing a bit at this point. And I wanted to do less rather than more, but I didn't want to have it look half done. So it was trying to do just enough detail that it carried the effect without drawing the attention too much, because I really wanted the framed Art Nouveau structure across the railway track to be what we actually saw. You're seeing this being drawn at 4 times real time. It took me about 45 minutes to draw, counting the 5 minutes that didn't get filmed. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope you found this an interesting exercise. I'll post this photo on my YouTube community page, so if you want to have a go drawing this Otto Wagner pavilion, you'll be able to do it right now. All the best. Bye.